You're listening to Thunderquack Podcast Network. This is the Thunderquack Podcast, the official podcast of Thunderquack Podcast Network, where anything can happen. So strap yourselves in and hold on to your butts. It's Thunderquack time!
Hello, and welcome to the Thunderquack Podcast, the official podcast of thunderquack.com, which you can get every Tuesday at patreon.com/thunderquack, just like our podcast producers, Brian Mirowski and JJ Samuel, or you can wait and get it late every Friday on podcast services across the galaxy. I am one of your hosts, Amanda Conkin.
And I'm your other host, Ryan Karen.
And as you can tell, because I'm doing the intro, Mike is not here today. And I do apologize to everybody who knows this opening by heart if I did mess it up. But I'm pretty sure that that's what it is. So thank you for bearing with me during this delightful, Amanda and Ryan edition of the Thunderquack podcast.
It's always fun to be your alternate mic.
I know. Well, I like the power that Mike bestows on me to be able to do the intro however poorly I pull it off.
The vice host role.
Right? Mm-hmm. It's great. And anyways, I'll see. I'll try not to talk too much about the differences of this Thunderquack, but it is cool to have you on I don't know if you've been on the Thunderquack podcast because you're on the Thunderquack network, but I don't know if you're on the Thunderquack.
We've had a few conversations. I'm not sure which banner. We've had a few that I know were Patreon specific.
So I think the Patreons know who you are. Yeah, which is great.
But yeah, I'm also the co-host of the Riverdale Gang, a watch-along critical commentary podcast. So yeah, delighted to talk about other mainstream nerdery that is less constrained by the Archie comics shenanigans.
That's great, though. I love it so much.
Shenanigans. Goodness.
I only see it from afar and basically like what I absorb on social media, but I don't know. Riverdale does seem like a special story. Like it's still going. Hey, like, are you guys? Is it getting picked up for another season?
Oh yeah, we're back with the second half of the 5th season in August, middle of August. So that'll be neat. They just hiatus midway because that's what production's like right now.
Oh, right.
For 5 months, 6 months. But yeah, it's trucking along and doing weird new creative things. And simultaneously, it's doing that thing B-grade camp gets to do, that it jams a whole bunch of truth and really uncomfortable realities under all of the neon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I see. And that's not, I mean, but in a good way, right? Like you kind of are like, hey, there's some interesting stuff.
Yeah, okay. Like you can't take anything in the world too seriously, but because of that, there's a great deal of subject matter and messaging and real contemporary issues and conversations that I think the creative team, who I think are ultimately much better trained artists than the product they're producing. Like they're producing a piece of entertainment that is following a very specific script and budget and genre style. But I think these are the team behind it is actually quite clever and with a broad background in theater writing and publishing. And I think that comes out in some of the really weird things that they try and often fail horribly at. But often, every once in a while, you get like these sweet, intimate 5-minute monologues from random Archie character number 7 about queer childhood in Middle America. And it's just like, I know you plucked that from your masters. I'm sure of it. But you got it on television now as a convenient plot of the week. So That kind of weird mismatch is what I love about Riverdale. There's so much beautiful disjointed artistry and statements. It's like you take Sappho's poetry fragments and then you just slap them on a McDonald's menu.
There you go. It's apt. I guess I really did. I think I've only really watched the one episode because I think I came on one episode of Riverdale, and I think that that's really the only episode that I've watched in its entirety. So
It's
I
fair.
may have watched the pilot, but I mean I like that. Like exactly what you're saying. I think that there's a certain level of, and I mean if you people don't know the Ryan and Amanda dynamic, but I do feel like much like the Amanda and Mike dynamic, we tend to talk about the not only the pop culture but like what's underneath and the story and like the what it's talking about and like how it's contributing to the conversation. So not much different than a regular Thunderquack podcast. But the stuff that you're talking about and that kind of being able to say something important sort of wrapped in a candy coating, if you
Hmm.
will, is I mean exactly my kind of media, because I really do like media that is sort of light and enjoyable, but also
Hmm.
that says something. And it's I find that people are starting to expect that, right? Where it's like they don't just
Mm-hmm.
want fluffy things. They want something that actually is going to make them think a little bit. Or they'll know, like, I mean, because reality TV still exists. If you just want something that you don't really have to think about too much, I think you can go. There's a genre for you. There's a genre for everyone. But I don't know, like especially these sort of teen driven or
Hmm.
teen, and like the ones that are like targeting teen audiences, because I think that there's something about the next generation of what is it, Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen whatever
Gen Z.
whatever the Gen
The
Z
Zoomers.
that expects, yeah, they expect something more from their people. If you can hear things buzzing, my sister's like trying to call our whole family on things. Sort of
I mean,
interesting.
rightly so. Like we've done our job over the last 15 years of aggressive agitation. If the kids coming next actually expect some decent representation and are willing to go to bat and throw money for it, I think
Well,
that's a nice benchmark.
Well, no, I mean it is, and I think that because I think we heard that a lot during the like when all the like oh my gosh, it's so terrible that I can't remember like the massive sort of school shooting, and then there was all the young kids that came
Parkland,
forward, and they're like, you know what, yeah,
Parkland and March
and they're
for Our
like,
Lives movement. Yeah.
yeah, and they're like, we expect more. We think that people should do more. And everybody was like, what are these young kids doing? And it's like, well, Gen Z got so disillusioned. They saw
Hmm.
all these like, because the millennials now that are what we're in our early 30s, sort of being like, well, this world isn't what is expecting. Like this
Hmm.
seems like, and so we're still sort of clinging on to the hope that we were sold. And I think that it trickles down to Gen Z being like, well, that's not true. I'll never own a house. I'll always be in debt. I shouldn't go to school. Like it's just sort of that they sort of see the world for what it is. And I hope that they become the
Without
voices.
broad stroking or like putting the
Oh,
duty
of
of
course.
fixing it all on them,
Oh
or
no.
treating the next generation as the Messiah children who will save us. No, they're just appropriately cynical, whereas we once
Exactly.
had hope before it was shattered.
Exactly. We have the sort of the rose-colored glasses, and we're kind of like, but we too could be Jeff Bezos. Instead of, and
Oh.
and it's like but it's the Gen Zs being like, no, we will never be Jeff Bezos, and also he should stop scooping his gold into space shuttles that he's going to shoot into the sky, and instead
Hmm.
do something to fix this world. And so I just like, because I don't know, there is something that I think that millennials, again, not broad strokes, but I do think that there's a certain amount of, well, we could be whatever we wanted to be because that's what we were
Mm.
told. and
Yeah,
I
we
and I think
sure
that
were told that. Maybe at
it
some
I mean
point
it
parents stopped that messaging or got tired of it or had heard it themselves and are seeing the faults.
right, well, I feel like that might be part of it too, right? Is that there's this new generation that are being raised by another generation being like, maybe just,
Hmm.
have aspirations that you can achieve in your lifetime with,
Hmm.
if you're not living in a totally like a system that's built against you in really like discriminatory ways depending on where you live. Anyways,
Well,
it's
these are also conversations that have long been happening. We can cyclic examples of changing generational conversations, but we're having it all out in public loudly at the same time in front of each other,
Oh,
with each other, at each other right now, in a way that,
because the
like,
internet exists?
yeah, it's neat. It's the information age. Like Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman is every bit the nihilism of that I love in seeing Zoomers, or early surrealist art is very much a lot of the nihilism that I see in and love in Zoomers. Buto dance, an expressionist Japanese and now Swedish dance form um, in which you dance the life to death of an experience or feeling or mood. And it grew out of the cultural trauma of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That was their core motivation point.
I didn't know that. That's so cool.
Yeah,
I mean, devastating, but I don't know if anybody has experienced Butoh, but you should Google that and just see. It's
watch
haunting.
some
I feel
videos.
like,
It's magical. It's one of the scariest art forms I've ever seen.
but I guess it's the general. I mean, I guess that makes sense that like these conversations that happen through art. I will say that serialized television has just come into its own over the last while, right? Because the
Mm-hmm.
changing consumption and the way that we consume media, it would make sense that those conversations are happening now on a serialized television format as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to previously, right? So I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that there's something to that, right? About the same conversations happening but in different ways as sort of we evolve and change, and the way that we communicate with one another
Mm-hmm.
does the same thing. So I mean, that's
Yeah,
cool.
well,
I like it.
you can now go Google Buto, Butuh, Buto,
Mhm.
and there are hundreds of videos available for you on YouTube. And otherwise, that will give you like a robust sense of what this art form is. Look for mostly nude people painted white, writhing to sort of new age John Cagey metronome music. That's what you're looking
Nice.
for. Sit with it until you're uncomfortable.
And that's the and then
um,
you've experienced it the way that it's supposed to be experienced.
mhm.
Yeah.
And you can go do that right now. Now, I am excited because there's a once a year Buto performance, like in 2 weeks on Wreck Beach. I will bus
Oh,
for an hour and walk for an hour down 1,000 stairs to watch this once a year dance performance, because that's how you can access live Buto. But if you're less picky and you haven't spoiled yourself like me, you can just go enjoy Buto on YouTube. And it's right there for
nice.
you, all the despair and creative discourse. It's all laid out and available now in a way that, who read Death of a Salesman when it was published? How many people actually saw Death of a Salesman in Arthur Miller's lifetime? Yes, we studied it
Huh.
a generation or two later, but at
Because
that
we had
time,
to.
and we were way past the actual cultural context, social context, and messaging of the it was written. A generation and a half later, it's a completely different conversation, and we're deciphering this story of the past instead of learning from it or opining on it. And
Right,
then,
and like riffing on it in the time that it's made, and like the conversation that it's happening and sparking.
mhm.
Um,
So
you've actually
I know Amanda.
sorry.
I know we don't really do topics, but as soon as Amanda asked me, that's the first thing I asked for. Like, what are subjects? And she offered bullet points, which was very kind of her. But
It's good.
I
And
just
I
want.
will say it's not that Mike and I don't do topics because we don't have topics on this show. It's that Mike and
Mhm.
I kind of connect for our podcast and we go, "What are we talking about?" Although Mike did come up with a whole agenda for this year. So, but we're just
Yeah,
throwing that agenda out the window. So,
and the planning lives in different places in our brains and how we
there you go.
podcast. So in my mind, our I guess our general theme and conversation today, the things I'm excited and have a couple of things I specifically want to mention about are the benchmarks of diversity and representation as seen in the three big Disney Plus series. WandaVision, Falcon and Winter Soldier, and Loki. Though Loki is still happening, we can't analyze it too much. We won't spoilerize it. Um, But I guess spoiler warnings for WandaVision and Falcon and Winter Soldier. I'm really excited to chat a bit about those and where they sit in the wider zeitgeist of popular entertainment, having critical conversations.
Awesome. And
Oh
but
yes, sorry.
you, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah. Go ahead.
I also want to note and recognize that Amanda and I are super limited perspective on these subjects. We are both white settler Canadians. Um, I have I have recommendations and resources and a bunch of other podcasts that I think you would probably love that I'll throw out at the end of this conversation. Because if you get there and you still are enjoying it, then here's a bunch of other places to go listen to, specifically this by more knowledgeable voices than ours on the subject.
Nice. No, I appreciate it because we always we try to contextualize our conversations all the time. And before before we get into stuff that's like actually about stuff, when you're sort of like Google it, it's online for Buteau. I was like, hey,
Mhm.
I should talk about the thing that I created that's available online. So I'm
Oh
totally using this as a shameless plug. Um, for people to go to Watch Dust. They have short films that are like of the sci-fi genre on YouTube
yeah. Mhm.
that you can just watch for free. And a short film I made called Happiness is one of those films.
Oh
If you're
yay.
in the international audiences, so it's not available in Canada on Watch Dust. If you're in Canada, you need to watch it on Crave because that's who actually bought the license agreement for it in Canada and gave us the money to make this short film called Happiness, which is so great. We very much appreciate the Bell Media Fund and the Harold Greenberg Fund. But the international audiences, Dust came to us and they said, hey, we like your short and we want to show it to people. So if you want to check out some work that I did, you can see it for free. I think it's watchdust.com, but if you also like are on YouTube and you basically look for Dust and Alter, basically, or I think you can say watch here. I'm Googling it as I'm talking to you guys. So watch Dust, and then Dust shows up as the main thing, and they have so many short films, and they're all really cool science fiction based films. They have like new films like at 3 times a week, and you can like comment and talk and chat, and anyways, it's very exciting. So if you haven't checked out Watch Dust, check it out and look at they're all just like bite size. They're like between 10 and 20 minutes, most of them. And if you just want some cool sci-fi content, like they're pretty good. Like they curate some really awesome stuff. Not to toot my own horn or anything. But I'm really excited. If you want our short just got released last week, so it's one of the most recent ones that's on there. And yeah, so you can check it out. You can check out media that I made and then talk about it critically on the internet, just like we are doing now. But yeah, it's a shout out to Download Joy Productions, which is the production company that I own with Luvia Peterson and Hugh Lander, two awesome Vancouver-based ladies. And we've created one other short film. I think the one I was talking about earlier this year, called I, Dorothy. That's not available yet anywhere for people to see because it was part of Crazy Eights, but hopefully it will be soon. And you know me, I will let you know when it's available, where you can watch it. But yeah, that's it. That's my little like mini plug for like watch something, and let me know. Tweet us. Let us know how you feel or what your thoughts are. You know me at aconkin. You can let me know. I'd love to hear what you think. But that's it. Now we can talk about actual media that people are aware of instead of just the things that I
Mainstream media.
made with friends.
I
Mainstream
mean,
media.
it's you're
Exactly.
you're on your way. It's on the internet, and shorts are wonderful bite-sized filmmaking. Like it took me a while to appreciate it, and I think um, Disney and Pixar shorts sort of reminded me the value of the medium that I totally knew as a kid watching Bugs Bunny, but I sort of forgot.
Right.
Like 10
I mean,
minutes is fantastic length.
that that's how much my brain can process, right? Like it kind of is nice to just have these little especially if you
Mhm,
can tell a cohesive story, because that's the hardest thing with shorts is to be able to have like a
mhm,
beginning, a middle, and an end, and be able to be like that was satisfying in and of itself, and it's not leading to something else. Even though like most
mhm,
shorts are sort of proof of concepts, it's cool to be able to find like a really strong short film
mhm.
that
And
you
I
know
no,
speaks to you.
I'm a little less married to narrative style as well, though. But I think that um,
Oh.
that also like whether it's chronological, the narrative, or whether it's more abstract, um, having some sort of thesis question that is presented, a limited range of subject for thought that is explored by the characters and their experiences. I really like that short films as a bite-sized philosophy exercise, like Sudoku for
It's
morals.
I like it. No, that works. It's a good a good extraction. Um and as we go, like you said, Ryan, we do have some ideas of what we're going to chat about. People, if you want like an in-depth analysis of Marvel's last few series, obviously check out the Nuff Said podcast that comes to you straight on this network, where I think Curtis and myself and Mike have talked about, we talked about WandaVision and we talked about Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and of course there will be enough said on the upcoming Black Widow movie that comes out this week. I'm so excited. And then we'll also do enough said on Loki when that's done, which is exciting. So we're not going to talk too much about upcoming things that obviously we're going to do full dedicated podcast to, but it just makes sense that when we're talking about like zeitgeist and we're talking about influential pop culture, that I mean my brain automatically goes to Marvel. And I think when I was talking to you, Ryan, I was like, well, I'm really excited for Black Widow, but I'm also like really apprehensive that we put all of this sort of weight on her shoulders where we're like, she's got to do well because she's a female superhero. And we chatted just like the little drop that we got of the what is it, the Immortals or the
Eternals.
the up, Eternals, yeah, the Eternals, like
Yeah,
even just that little,
Clozo's
like what was
Eternals.
it, like a 1 minute teaser or whatever. Mike and I chatted about it for like, we wound up talking about it for like 30 minutes because we're just like desperate for like interesting, like diverse content that's upcoming, and we have all our hopes and dreams on these things. So I think before we go into that, it's like a nice reflective, like again, Mike's like, podcast about whatever you want, and I was like, we'll just talk about the things I love, which is Marvel, even though we already talk about it. But I think through that lens, that's sort of what I'm approaching this, right? Is like, how do we set ourselves at like our expectations as we go forward, by looking backwards at the stuff that has sort of come in, like, and that conversation that Disney's started for us, in the representation that already exists.
Started for us there. I want to jump in and throw out sort of a thesis statement that I want to argue today.
Great.
That the Disney Marvel world is an important watermark for acceptable public discourse, acceptable conversations. That Disney and Marvel are masterful followers at gauging, but also king making, in that they say when it's socially acceptable for something to be mainstream in a very big way. But they are not the groundbreakers. They do not take the risks, generally speaking. And for me, the 3 Disney Plus series really have important examples of that. But also, speaking of Black Widow, a woman leading a superhero movie. How is that still all put on her shoulders? We did this with Captain Marvel. We did this with Wonder Woman. Like, aren't we done firsting? Or is there another dimension that I'm missing? Because I was thinking about that specifically today. That like the second and the third and the fourth examples of any singular groundbreaking representation are so important for how they continue the conversation past that groundbreaking first. That is as much a like just breaking the ground is its own spectacular achievement. But when you have peers and cohorts there, and there are there's a variety of views and perspectives and examples and artistic takes in any type of representation. When you get a whole bunch of queer artists together, trans artists together, Black artists together, that it's a neat synergy of the fifth and the sixth and the seventh. But like, is Black Widow really the third big benchmark? Like that's picking up some speed, right?
I mean, I hope so. I mean, it's been years. It's been years in between. I heard
Hmm.
a what was it? It's again, I think on the internet, right? It's like the Wright brothers built the worst plane ever, but
Hmm.
because they were first, right? It's like somebody's got to go first, and
Hmm.
you put all your hopes and dreams on it, but it's like that wasn't how it all. That's not how it should be, right? It's like
Hmm.
you start so that people can build upon what it is that you did, and they can do things that you maybe failed on, and they can grow and learn and change. And so maybe that's what
Hmm.
it's all about is trying to figure out how to make that how to make that work. So I get what you're saying. Like, what is it? How do we deal with that? I don't know. Right. So do you have a thought on that? Because it's a very
Mm.
deep question that I'm like, I don't know if I'm empowered, if I'm able to answer this question.
I don't. I think I'm really interested in noticing and acknowledging that let's I may be wrong, but excluding Star Wars, talking about superhero films with a singular female lead. Um, we've got Captain Marvel, Wonder Woman, and now Black Widow as huge blockbusters, big lead projects. Um,
Yeah, I
so
mean,
if,
the Supergirl tried to do it
it
in,
did
like, the
not
'60s
though.
or '70s. It did not, though.
Yeah, I'm
So, it
talking
doesn't
about
count.
in the
Yeah.
current zeitgeist, in the
In the
current wave.
yes, in the current zeitgeist, you are
Mhm.
correct. There really isn't anything else. But I
Um.
mean,
Hmm.
but Wonder Woman got to do it twice
Hmm.
because she had 2 films so
Yep,
far
there was a
in the same
sequel.
period of time that it took for Marvel to do 2.
Hmm. Hmm.
Anyways, but, yeah. No, you're right. It's picking up momentum slowly, but she is the 3rd.
But yeah, it's. I'm very interested to see what happens with the fourth and the fifth and the sixth now. More than what happens with the third, because there was a whole hurricane of important conversations that happened around and during and because of Captain Marvel and because of Wonder Woman. There were a whole bunch of um, really neat points of cognitive dissonance where a plot point or a scene or an action or choice really depended on just a little bit of a lived experience and a woman's perspective and way of being in the world that went over a great deal of audience's head. Um, it showed me a great deal about how undertrained we are as an audience to see in this medium experiences outside of a very tight script. Um, so and I think that's quite common in firsts that there's some like setting of ground and teaching of vocabulary. Um, But once that's there, does it thrive or does it become a 1960s Supergirl project? An interesting footnote. Um, and it takes the Black Widows and the next half a dozen um, films that get ascribed this mantle and label and weight, I think, to really push through that, hopefully, that expectation.
Well, yeah, I mean, you would hope. I think that's what we're trying to do, and what I'm hoping we're seeing, especially, I mean, it's exponentially more so in television than it is in features. Still, I
Mm.
have no idea why, right? I don't
No,
know.
there's
And I think that that's why
different
I'm
risks,
interested to
different
talk about
production
the
rates.
yeah, exactly. But when you look at something like WandaVision where I mean, they put so much time and energy and money
Hmm. Hmm.
into that, which is cool. Like that the Disney Plus wave is starting a how do we put time and energy into television, because everything's sort of coming directly to us now,
Hmm.
especially in this new post-COVID world. Well, we're not quite in a post-COVID world, just so everybody's really clear. But you know what I mean, right? Like in terms of
Yes.
like if people can
Next
get
wave
stuff
of
directly
media.
to them. Yeah.
Um,
How do we invest in that appropriately? So
I do wonder how much that relates to, like, I wonder how Disney Plus plays on an international market, what the release looks like there. Because I know that's an excuse often given for a more conservative and cautious standard applied to films, especially blockbuster films, is the
right.
the both real and boogeyman for an audience who will discriminate. Like, there's legitimately
Right.
authoritarian countries, and not a small number of them, but there's also the excuse that Hollywood sits on.
Oh, all the time. And I mean, it's I I think it still is. They were doing so many theatrical releases
Mhm.
for so long, and you still get you still get those conversations happening, and I don't know. I can't I can't speak to that for the definitely for the TV releases. I feel like it's
Mhm.
definitely still a feature
Mhm.
conversation, because I'm
Yeah.
just wondering if maybe it's just like, again, the investment, like where stuff comes from. And right now I think the audiences that are going to the movie theater really are in these larger territories, right, where they're really banking on making sure that they get blockbuster draw, or that they can slip into those like coveted slots for foreign films
Mhm.
that aren't so widely, they're not going to get them everywhere. But
Right.
yeah,
There's a
hopefully.
few very very specialized prestige winner conditions of the blockbuster, whereas you can actually do quite well with any number of television shows in a year or a season, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Yeah, and I mean,
Mm.
I think that's really what it is it's the cost benefit analysis. And we always talk about this, is like putting our money where our mouth is, and these big
Mm.
studios, until they sort of say, you know what, we're not gonna lean to, what was it? It was like the 100th anniversary of communism in China or something like that.
Mm.
And that's a whole big thing that we just always forget, that there is like a whole huge powerhouse in the world stage that is built fundamentally on this ideology that is not in line with the rest of the world, or I mean, the most economically prevalent rest of the world.
Mm.
um but that it shapes how they consume media and what they're allowed to consume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
uh
recognizing that there are cultural gaps that are both different and often bigger in core taught indoctrinated philosophies between what we get out of our formative media and
mhm.
where representation is at in each place and each culture and uh, each language especially, I think, makes such a huge difference. Like the I think the sort of Western hegemony that we're both thinking within is really maybe a third of the world if we're rounding up and looking
Oh
at
yeah.
like influenced places like Japan. Um, but we have such predominance of English language media, that's such a nice shared bulk of a thing, that um, it's easy to build this critical mass of a discourse and conversation. But even then, there's only a few blockbusters a year. I'm really fascinated by the sort of progressive teen shows that I'm seeing trickling in from Europe quite frequently. Various versions of
Ooh.
Scam. There's a new one on Netflix called the Young Royals, and it's this lovely
Oh.
gay love story between a teenage prince of Denmark, a fictionalized prince of Denmark, and there's a lot of like medium budget TV happening in non-English languages that is broaching this really important contemporary these living conversations and exploring them in ways that I couldn't fathom seeing on Disney Plus yet. And uh, in the same vein of like we see different risks on TV, um, I'm excited to see that. But then I look at everything on Disney Plus and I see the safety in
Oh
contrast.
yeah.
Um, I'm excited to see what Disney Plus presents because it like I was saying before, a watermark. It gives me a good sense of what the broad English language acceptance baseline is. Um,
Well, but also that the more that they pretend to be progressive, right, for lack of a better sort of thing, the more that
mm,
they will eventually find themselves there. And I mean, again, not to
mm,
no spoilers or anything for this, but like Loki having a female director,
mhm,
right, leads, like, that stuff permeates through all the core creative elements, and you've
yeah.
got the what was it like the seeing a post go around with the one of the actresses for the that's been cast in the film being on the show having like zippers built into her costume so that she could breastfeed while
Hmm.
she's in the dressing room, and that
Yep.
just being a thing that when you have sort of female driven creators or female creators, you create this sort of awareness and acceptance
Hmm.
for things that wouldn't necessarily be standardized or even thought of.
Yeah.
And so I feel like they'll force themselves across a finish line eventually.
Mm.
But I understand what you're talking about when you're talking about like the like a sort of a false sense of what is it
Mhm.
like being progressive, and
Yeah.
that you're critiquing this, like, are they creating a safe conversation of
Mhm.
diversity and of inclusion, and
Mhm.
I'm curious if you have some specific like nitpicks on that when it comes to like WandaVision or
Mhm.
Falcon and Winter Soldier, because I haven't talked to you about either of those things
Oh
yet.
yeah. Yeah, let's crack that ice. But while we're on Loki, I want to just sort of touch on a couple points of there that I did want to mention that are I don't think spoilery. They're so inconsequential, but they're little fandom bait things and details that were tossed out. So if you're skip the next 5 minutes if you're extremely precious about detail spoilers, but they're very minute. Um, in one episode, Loki passingly confirms that has had romances with men and women in a very roundabout way, and in the title scene, um, you can see in Loki's profile that his gender is noted as fluid. Um, these are really, really important benchmarks,
Like,
but they're
yeah,
also
yeah, yeah.
so minute and so limited. But where we see them, I feel like we there's so much to be read into what is allowed to be progressive. So a title card that will be seen if you go looking for it. That is functionally
Right,
non-canonical. That is the equivalent of a props person putting in an important Easter egg detail. Um, Important representation, but not representation. Passing mention,
right.
an important step, but in no way do I count it as by representation. They are they're not engaging with that or allowing it any further presence. It's a throwaway Dumbledore's gay moment.
I was gonna say that was exactly what I referenced it to. Is that like when
Mhm,
these big creators come in and they're like, "What are you talking about? The show is diverse. So and so is gay,"
mhm,
and you're like, "But where in the narrative did it become a core part of the story that
mhm.
changed something about the character?"
Or
Right? It doesn't even have to
or
be like a
even
story point or a plot point, but just like,
even just a core part of the character. I don't.
yeah,
It
yeah,
doesn't need to be. I don't need a romance or it to always be about the gay. But if you include multiple queer perspectives, like that impacts more than you can see when that's faked. When you can see when it's a bunch of uh, straight characters from a straight creator who happen to be kissing each other in a way that is
right,
thought to be kind of queer. You can see it.
right.
See right through. Um,
I mean, I hope
yeah.
so. There's some people that don't. Some people are like, "Man, this is so progressive."
You can see right through if you have your own foot in the door in some capacity.
I
If
guess.
you, I think if you, I think a really important access point for a lot of people is where are you underrepresented? Where do you need to see yourself more, and where do you wish you saw yourself? Um,
Right.
Looking for these groundbreaking moments, and that might be extremely important for others. Um, I think that's a good step in breaking that ice and digging into that meta. If that's a way you want to analyze and engage with your media, as I really like to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, which is good.
Mhm,
Um, and I mean, I guess something that you've made me sort of think about a little bit then is, and I'm sorry, again, jumping all
mhm.
over because
Yeah, yeah.
to Falcon and the Winter Soldier,
Mhm,
the idea of them having the Black Captain America being in a TV series and not
mhm,
featured in a movie, there's something to that too about like well giving these characters safe space to show our diversity, but making it so that it's not going to impact our overall box office numbers or whatever it is, right? That you're like, what
Yes.
I'm just sort of thinking about that critically, which I don't even know if we went into. I feel like we did talk about some of this stuff on Enough Said when we did dissect the series, but that it's great for what it is, but maybe there could be more, right? And then it's like, what are those? How do we challenge these big conglomerates, right? If nothing else but putting our money places and giving them the money for what they currently have, right? Like showing that we're interested in this diversity to see how they will push it forward more, I guess. Like, right? Because it's like I don't know. I don't know if that it's just like it becomes like a little bit of a like sticky place where you're like, well, how do you show them that you want more of this? If not watching.
I'm looking at a very different starting point, I think. I don't.
Okay.
I am not engaging with Disney. They're gonna figure out
Okay.
what we want, and they will spoon feed it to us. They have budget for that, and many psychology graduates are well employed with market research. That's Disney isn't someone I will change or I will influence. I don't have $1 billion or a major market share to work with.
Right.
But smaller media. I would argue that that everything presented in Falcon and Winter Soldier walks on the territory tread by Watchmen and by Lovecraft
Right.
country, by
Okay.
the current zeitgeist of excellent Black American storytelling that has explored period and genre in rich, nuanced ways, and I think laid the societal foundation for Disney to present a story that is explicitly about Captain America being Black. That is
Right.
more explicit than I expected, and I really appreciate the story, the whole the sub narrative with the elder super soldier, whose name completely escapes me, which moment, um, about the elimination of someone who really was the first Black Captain America from history and from the narrative.
Right.
Those are all
Right.
groundbreaking things, but they I really don't think they would have happened on Disney if they didn't first happen in groundbreaking artistic fashions on HBO. And those pieces owe their roots to a lot of things you probably haven't seen, theater events and activist events and networking events of different
Right.
creatives
Right.
working
Right.
together. Um, but so at I can't see through the professional glaze. But I think we should look to the higher risk taking forms of media, like traditional television, like medium budget Degrassi um, in Canada or Scam in Europe, for where's the real groundbreaking experimental stuff slipping through that's going to set the stage and set the ground that that gives Disney its calculus permission to take this risk, because it is no longer a risk to them. It's been proven at this step, this step, this step. Great, we can talk about Be Black in America now. Finally, they did Black Panther, which is this wildly American perspective Pan Africana. Like, it's a fantastic film. It's a groundbreaking film, but it's also not talking about race in America. It's
Right.
circling around the edges. It's including impacts of, but
I mean, Killmonger was sort of supposed to be that, I think, in Black Panther. But you're right; it was at the periphery of that story. And
Killmonger
to
was like a pan imperialist global presence as well. He was American trained,
right,
but we spent no time in America and yet I believe it's a very American story. Not just because of the creators, the artist Ryan Coogler, and most of the team are English speaking American or UK. Um, a few of the artists I know, Lupita Nyong'o is Kenyan Mexican. Um, there were some wonderful on stage expressions of a broad range of African language and imagery and clothes and culture. Um, but most of the decision makers in the creative team were still Americans speaking from a Black American perspective. Um, and then letting those artists speak about the contemporary now. That's a whole, I think that's a new and important threshold. Like Shakespeare wrote about the king a generation ago because to write about the queen right now would get him killed. It's
Right.
they're writing about the queen.
I mean, I say that reality television would beg to differ, or I guess biopic television. There are
Mhm.
so many queen narratives, but I get what you mean.
Yeah.
In terms of like how you distance yourself from something,
There are no
so that it's like
there are no Elizabeth 2015 narratives, not yet.
that's fair.
Whereas Falcon Winter Soldier, I think, um, represents a real benchmark of speaking about contemporary Black American challenges and issues and lived experiences. Um, it speaks to the now in a way that I don't, to the immediate now of the people making it. Um,
Cool.
yeah, and I think it's an important distinction that are you telling a story about your life through fiction and your lived experiences as a collective of American artists, or are you creating a fantastical world or a superhero world? And they're doing all of those things. But the specific plot content that I was most excited about in Falcon Winter Soldier, I think, was that permission to speak to the now more than past examples, the here and
Right.
now. Um,
Um,
yeah. There's also a whole sub branch about um, disability in Falcon in Winter Soldier, disability representation that I think is hugely important and goes maybe underutilized to some degree, but is certainly present in Bucky's arc and in the very in Bucky's reaction shots, if you will. Like they spend so much time on emotive Bucky more than explanatory narrative Bucky, and it's a very
I mean,
take
emoji Bucky's
on his set of subject matter, um, PTSD, coming back from war, this disassociation between you and the society you're in, and the scenes of healing with Io in Wakanda, the healing narrative, the restorative recovery healing narrative, and one that explores a character living with and recovering from and um, adapting to disability and change and trauma in a way that brings us out the other end like healthy and healed and showing us the
right.
steps, not just montaging us through.
I think that for that too, one of the things that I find it was like a one it was like a meme, like a gag, but
Mm-hmm,
that they
mm-hmm.
had this meme, right, where it's like the we really needed therapy, but they gave us our own series gang.
Yep.
That was Wanda and Bucky and Loki. And
Yep.
it's like, well, because there's something about the trauma that like that they bring through into these longer narratives and exactly what you're
Mm-hmm,
talking about, that but there's so much in that they actually do like the therapy thing is like part of
mm-hmm,
which I completely sort of forget about in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, that there is that sort of conversation about healing and how you deal with that. And I think, I mean, more so, I mean, that's WandaVision is
mm-hmm,
that's about. Like, how do you, when you're, magically powerful, right? How do you heal from something, but also as an individual, just even without that power, like
mm-hmm,
what do you inflict on other people, and how in trying to deal with your own mental health, what responsibility is back on you for making sure
mm-hmm.
that you don't cause further harm for people.
Hmm.
but also find a way to be able to live in the world and navigate it in a way
Yeah.
that you're not like tearing apart at the seams. So
And I'm thrilled to see that in the bubblegum superhero stories. You know, those are not foreign to film, but what I might expect to see at best in Oscar bait, uh,
right.
I can now see as the subcategory of what Elizabeth Olsen gets to do as Scarlet Witch. And I've always been enamored with fan fiction that very specifically sits in the healing space is often glossed over between pieces of narrative. The emotional and mental processing in healing. I've always loved that analysis of people writing, writing out some hypothetical character thoughts or steps of processing and coping. And it's one of my favorite subgenres of writing and fan fiction, and of
Nice.
engaging with and reacting to media in fandom. Um, the unseen healing is so fleshed out by the fandom, and I was thrilled to see that. That's so centered in WandaVision, grieving shown in messiness, um, without a hallmark bow tie to it. Um,
I we talked about this in Enough Said that I think one of our favorite moments, I think for many of us, or maybe it was just me, was just like that, like her falling to her knees in the middle of that outline of that house,
oh yes,
right? Where you're just like that, just like the grief that emanates off, like it's just so powerful and beautiful
mhm,
and painful, it's just uh, after this sort of light hearted series
mhm,
that you're just been going through and you're kind of like, what's the catch with this, and to
mhm,
really get at the core of something deep. um I don't know, I think that was really cool. And I mean, I like, I get what you're saying though, that these shows aren't necessarily starting, right? They're not starting this conversation, they're reacting to this
mhm.
conversation, but
Yes.
I do think that they are amplifying it for audiences that wouldn't otherwise engage in the conversation. So just like we talked about, I think in our like Patreon after stuff, when we started like just our like little chit chat at the beginning of this, that
Mhm,
so much of our conversations and our reality is shaped by the communities that we inhabit and who we bounce our ideas off of, and how we get to engage critically with the world around us.
mhm.
I think you're right that Disney is reacting to a conversation that's already starting, but it's not to say that they're not starting it for other audiences,
Yes,
right?
they're translating it, and it's sort of a final step of maturation of a certain conversation disseminating into this shared cultural piece.
Right.
Like that's the kind of the deepest saturation of the pop culture. I think it would be the justification of a lot of these stories and issues. Um, and I think I think it's an important step. Um, I guess I enjoy it as a viewer. I don't
Mhm.
engage so much with with the Disney standards as a creator as an artist, because that's not where I see change originating. I guess I'm more interested in
Right.
the in where the new standards are being set and established and tested and tried. Because I tend to find truer representation and richer and bolder representation in those spaces first before I get them in Disney Plus. Like two of my very favorite characters in WandaVision. Um, Monica Rambeau, amazing
Mhm.
built up protagonist character. Um, but there are big missing pieces. Captain Marvel is functionally her stepmother? Question mark. There's an intense relationship
Right.
there, but there's some things that are being skirted around. Authority and power and growing up, and Monica Rambeau as a current generation character, as a millennial essentially. All these fascinating areas they could explore that they laid out colorfully on the lawn for us to see uh, in WandaVision. Billy, Billy and Teddy, Wanda's children. Oh my gosh.
Right.
Billy, who becomes Wiccan, is one of the most important gay characters in comic books of the last 20 years. And groundbreaking to have this character on television. However,
Wow.
he's a prepubescent child. What new hell of queer
Right.
baiting is this? You give me the prepubescent version of this character, and then you banish them to super hell.
But aren't you excited for well, isn't it what is it? Or sorry, it's the Young Avengers, right? Is that what it
Yes.
is?
Yeah.
And I just think that they are setting up something really cool that hopefully, again, by the time that rolls around, they'll be engaged in that conversation in a way that they'll be able to lean into it fully. I don't know. I guess I think I'm pleased by this articulation that you've got on it, because that's always been, I think, the difference in how I engage with this type of media. Because for me, I don't necessarily feel like I have my representation is everywhere, right? Because I am a hetero cis white lady from Canada, right? Like
Yeah,
I don't have
we've
like
watched a lot
so
of
we've
straight romance
lot of that,
films
right?
together.
Exactly.
So
So much of
many.
it. So many. But so for me, I love that the media that like this, like Disney's a lateral move for me, right? So like it's the same. It's the same as what I've been continuing to consume. But then it's starting to have these conversations with the people that I consume this culture with, right? Other people, and making it sort of peek at them in ways that they wouldn't otherwise engage with. And for me to be able to signal boost that, I
Yeah.
think that's how I can contribute meaningfully to this conversation,
Mhm.
because I am not the person, like I should hold open the space for the creators that want to create the groundbreaking content, right? But I'm not the one that's going to be creating those, like I'm not the one that's going to be creating those series that are really like speaking to something and sparking stuff, just the way that you said, right? Like that really exciting like thought-provoking work that is allowing these other conversations to exist. So as a creator, I think that my space is in amplifying those voices. And one of the ways that I find that easiest to do is to speak to the like, right? If I use my little quotes, and the people that consume the same content as me consume, like if I can package it in these big candy coating packages, then I am just building on the work of, I know in the backs of the creators that came before it, but helping that content be maybe more accepted in the mainstream media, however small and incremental those steps may be. But so I don't know. That's just that's my 2 cents on that, in a way that I haven't actually critically thought about that before, like why it is that I'm so excited to see the representation, however little it is, in stuff like the Disney Plus series, and like it's not very well, but in Star Wars, or in
Yeah,
other,
what we
the
do
new
get,
Gossip
which we will
Girl.
take.
The new Gossip Girl has diverse characters, even though I don't know how many there actually are, but
Diversity of everything
I'm
but
excited.
class.
Well, yes. No, okay, I will say that's like the whole trope of the first Gossip Girl was that they were poor. They only had a big loft in Brooklyn, so they
Oh
were,
yeah.
they were scraping
Poor.
the ex
Um,
ex 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 what are they, musicians, anyways. Sorry,
um,
not to be flippant.
I 2 points ago, I was really psyched and agreeing with you that pop culture gives us such important shared language and shared jargon and shared touch points that we can
Yes.
use to have these conversations with. And I want to also jump on your segue of amplifying voices, because I have a big long list of a couple of places and people to reference and recommend if
Woohoo!
these are conversations you really want to engage with in pop culture, with diversity and with more diverse voices.
Thank you.
Some podcasts that I really enjoy, that I learn a lot from, and that I connect with and love to engage with. Minority Corner, a very popular mainstream talk podcast that has been around for around 4 or 5 years now. It's part of the Max Fun Network, the Adventure Zone folks. It is a black, gay, feminist pop culture talk show. Every episode, they will talk about current events with those with those specific lenses of the Black American experience, a gay experience, a feminist lens. They frequently have quite accomplished guest thinkers and co-hosts to add perspectives on specific subject matter that they're focusing on that week. They often present a simple essay format, a quick summary conversation about some important historical conversation that is related to something going on in media, but easy to miss. Like we're gonna they're in a week where immigration is the major political subject. They took 45 minutes to talk about um, the history of Mexican immigration into America, going back to the Mexican American War in the 1850s and the various steps and back and forth and political swings that have gotten us here in kind of a spoken wiki form. I find it very accessible, very, very fun and bright and cheery and very conversational listening. Um, that's one of my regulars. Another favorite of mine, which is only one season long currently, is a podcast called Coffee with My Ma. This is a storytelling podcast where we listen to a very an activist from the 1960s through 1990s named, pardon me while I'm reading to work my pronunciation. Um, uh, Con- Continental Horn, who is Ganawa, from Ganawage, a Mohawk community that is just across the river from Montreal. And she was at the 1990s Oka crisis, a standoff between the Canadian military and Mohawk warriors and activists. Um, and she shares rather tangential and wild but personal experiences of being a young Mohawk activist, engaging in Ottawa, working with the Canadian government and Indian affairs, working in international relations, spending time in Cuba, uh, it- learning about the communist and socialist revolution, spending time in Europe. Like she's a very fantastically well traveled speaker and leader and artist, and she just talks about her life, and it's fabulous. And her daughter, who you may know from Letterkenny, uh, Cagnetio Horn, interviews her and gets her talking about various subjects or things that lifelong family anecdotes or stories that they want to get on tape because they are really important bits of living history that speak to the indigenous North American perspective, specifically the Haudenosaunee and Mohawk perspective, but also the forefront of political discourse in North America. Um, we often forget included First Nations leaders from all around the continent. They were at the forefront of these conversations, right along with Black and Catholic and progressive and Jewish leaders, and that's it's a fascinating perspective to see a time that is, I feel, well explored, or I thought was well explored, and I was well aware of. But yeah, it really brings some new I love the stories. They're fantastic stories. They're charming and cheerful, and they get you laughing, but they also slap you with racism briefly. It's great. It's my jam.
Oh, jeez.
Um,
All right. All right.
a couple, sorry, a couple more. Sweet Bitter
No, it's great.
Podcast is my new favorite right now. It is a podcast all about Sappho, the
Oh, like
uh,
the
the
poet,
original lesbian,
yeah.
the vintage women who loved women in classic in European classics, and it's just in-depth analysis of poetry and fragments, and they go on this wild episode tangent about a current scandal in the papyrus industry where some dude stole millions of dollars from Oxford allegedly for Hobby Lobby, and it's wild, and there were fake Sappho poems and all
Wow.
sorts of shenanigans. But mostly they talk about gay poetry and how wonderful it is and the musicality of it. They have
Cool.
people singing Sappho in various ways. It's just a lovely deep dive into that root bit of poetry and identity. Also, Sappho, importantly, is the first surviving piece of media we have speaking in the first person. She's the oldest
Oh, I didn't
example
know that.
of media that says I.
Cool.
Yeah. So in that regard, so much of English and contemporary literature has this core ancestor in Sappho's poetry, which is mostly existing in partial line fragments. Go figure.
Nice.
So deep dive into that poetry. If you are much more for the hard-hitting crime podcast with facts and facts, Is This For Real is a journalistic narrative. I want to say slice of life, as much as matter of fact, uh, piece of journalism, podcasting about the experience with the Edmonton police services in Alberta, the capital and a large city in Alberta, Canada, and specifically from a Somali Canadian refugee and immigrant perspective. Um, there's a multi-generational community in Edmonton, specifically of several East African diaspora groups um, that are well established for decades now, and that have a really rich history of conflict brought on by the Edmonton Police Service. Everything the Black Lives Matter, all that, but specific to Edmonton, specific to like the lived experiences of the journalists and the people who are currently in their community that they go out and talk to about the thing that happened last month. It's a very matter of fact, very strong and impacting uh, piece of podcasting. If you really want to stare that right in the face from a very specific voice, I think I've not seen anywhere the Black Albertan perspective. Um, highly recommend. Can I ramble a little bit more?
I'm loving this. The like coming with all of this like recommendation stuff. Yeah, I feel like people can continue to listen to all of the things that you're recommending and getting people to go into different spaces. So yeah, I'm sorry that I don't have any cool
It's fine. It's
cool
fine. It's
things
fine.
that I'm recommending.
It's how I prep. Like, who are all the people who know more about this that I listen to and learn from? And I was like, there's a number of people who I mostly follow on Twitter, but who have podcast or radio broadcast works widely available, who I highly recommend for some important perspectives and voices on uh, well, I will mention as I go. Angela Sterritt, Sterritt, is a CBC reporter from the Gitxsan Nation in so-called Northern British Columbia, the unceded Gitxsan Nation. A near neighbor of the Wet'suwet'en Nation, quite at least nationally famous for last year's conflicts and blockades, uh, ongoing conflicts and blockades since well before last year. Um, she is a well-established, well-known journalist at the CBC, our Canadian public broadcaster, who has rich community ties all over Western Canada with a wide range of Indigenous communities, and really brings that reporting out of this genre place where it often is placed by news media, and I think has really been recognized for a number of excellent stories that she has helped bring attention to and bring some justice to about issues of racism and violence and inequality in this region. Um, really wonderful voice to follow, and she frequently speaks on CBC Radio, and many of her pieces are available or in expanded discussion form as a CBC Radio recording, which, with a little finagling, can be a podcast for you. Might already be. Another major voice I want to point to that is just a Twitter people, is the Choctaw Freemen. That's Choctaw Freemen, Cochtaw Free Men, which is an important activist group based in the Oklahoma Five Nations region of America. And they have been doing some fantastic outreach work and educational work in the wake of I want to reference the spectacular pop media success that was Watchmen and what it has done for the public conversation about the Tulsa massacres, about the Greenwood massacres, and how it has actually changed public discourse and public education curriculum by being so successful while telling that story to such a wide audience. And so this is an important
That's the recent Watchmen, right? Like
yes,
the
the
one that
HBO
just
Watchmen
yeah. Okay.
series,
Okay, cool.
which I cannot sing the praises highly enough of. And so the Freemen are the descendants of slaves who were owned by members of the Five Nations. And so, while Black Americans have very specific history with the American state and government and slavery and everything since, and all those lingering fragments and incarceration, there is an entirely separate conversation to be had between a number of First Nations and the descendants of their slaves, of the African slaves who they purchased through the transatlantic slave trade. And it is it's an entire it's an important conversation about identity happening between and amongst these core communities in the Americas that I think would be very easy to miss. That explores a lot of lateral violences and a lot of the ways in which supremacist settler cultures can pit groups against each other through the long systemic echoes, if not the individual choices, through these standards they set and then others have to buy into. So that's a really important voice that I would recommend looking into to tap into that conversation.
Just a little hint
Yeah.
for folks because I'm trying to like follow along with some of this stuff and I wasn't typing it as fast as I can. But you can find what I've noticed is that you can find Ryan on Twitter and then you can just follow the people he follows because I've gone through and already, even though you're talking about other stuff, I'm like, oh man, there's some of these other like podcasts. So, anyways, I'm just gonna plug your Twitter for a second. It's at
Thank
Ryan
you.
M. Caron. Caron, and I think that that's a way that people could start too, is to just go through and you have like a plethora of talk about being engaged in conversations with people that are saying something that's worth echoing and amplifying. I think that
it's
I
my
mean I can
personal
already tell,
reserve. It's where I
right? Yeah,
stash all the
no,
stuff I need to learn.
it's fabulous. Okay, maybe you got like two more, or I feel like you'll keep going.
I got 5 more, but I'll make it quick.
Okay, cool.
JP Bramer is another person on Twitter who I highly recommend, but he is best known as the writer of advice columnist Hola Papi, which has migrated across multiple internet media forms of the dying age of new journalism, but is most recently a book. Fantastic Mexican American gay perspective, and my favorite advice column, easily my favorite advice column currently in existence.
Nice.
And Anthony Oliveira, who is particularly relevant to us. I think he was like first famous as a quippy Twitter person to some degree, but he is has a doctor of literature focusing on Paradise Lost and queer readings in Roman Catholic literature and history. And since finishing his PhD, he has turned that into a long form podcast that I think you can subscribe to. That there's a Patreon for. That is a like longer than you could get into in a university class. It's like a multi-year university lecture building and
Wow.
re-listenable, looking at Paradise Lost from a contemporary queer lens, and just nom 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 nom, the kind of overthinking that I really love. But he's also Marvel's go-to gay writer now, which
Oh,
is so wonderful. He was the writer of a landmark special, My Drag Brunch with Loki, which featured Wiccan Billy from WandaVision, all grown up,
cool.
coexisting wonderfully with his beautiful, happy boyfriend, no drama, and talking about life with gender fluid Loki at drag brunch as a couple of queers with god tier power in the Marvel universe.
Amazing.
Just
I love it.
fantastic. He following that did some writing with the Emperor Hulkling. I believe he's done an issue of Steven Universe where they go to a pride parade, and most recently he is writing for the character Bobby Drake, Iceman. Um, what I've seen coming up next is a retrospective look at Bobby Drake being in the closet for the history of Bobby
Ah,
Drake, which is how it's been. This Iceman has been queer coded in many ways that go back to the original comics and have been translated and retranslated and retranslated and are finally being openly explored in the current iteration of X-Men. And yeah,
what's his name? Sorry.
Anthony Oliveira,
Okay.
Oliveria. Highly recommend. His Twitter points you to all the cool stuff he's writing, if nothing else.
Yeah.
Highly recommend. Uh, um, things I'm listening to that aren't podcasts, but I think which you might get something from in a cultural discourse. Jeremy Dutcher is a Wolastoqic language revitalizationist and classical singer, doing amazing work in the Maritimes region with um, revitalizing and performing and arranging classical Wolastoq and Mi'kmaq music with all of the bells and whistles of Euro tradition orchestration and vocalization, but rooted in that core um, that core music and melody. Um, not I so often hear a big old mishmash of something specialized and an orchestra, and it can be kind of a hot mess. This is not that. This is a beautiful dialogue between art forms. And Tanya Tagak, who is a wonderful activist and one of your best chances to hear Inuit throat singing in pop culture. The last thing I want to mention is
I'm just gonna amplify what you just said.
mhm,
In that if people are ever interested in just listening to stuff outside of your regular genre, like all of this stuff is on Spotify.
it's so
Like if you've ever
good.
thought about like just like going down a rabbit hole of like people that are revitalizing languages that are
Hmm.
not in the public discourse, and these musicians that are using their ancestral tongue to create this beautiful sort of music that really
Hmm.
speaks to like current pop culture undertones. It's
Yeah.
very cool, and I never would have thought to do that. And Ryan just had this beautiful plethora of just songs I would have never heard of, and that you can feel free listening to, because it's not like anybody has really heard of it, right? So you're not supposed to necessarily understand what it is that they're saying, but just
Hmm.
appreciating that there is this language and this art that wouldn't otherwise get out there. And I think that's so. Anyways, just for those
Yeah.
two particular artists that you just said, I just wanted to say it was really cool. I really loved it in ways that I was not expecting.
Hmm.
So yeah, just carry on. What's your last one?
For outer context, we were on a road trip a while ago while I was
Right.
on
Yeah.
a big Inuktitut dance music kick.
Yeah.
There's so much
Yeah.
good contemporary dance music that uses throat singing as rhythm quite frequently, and just So neat. Anyway, yeah, it's all there for you. You can access it like never before. Fandom Forward is an organization recently rebranded, formerly known as the Harry Potter Alliance. Recently rebranded for obvious reasons, because supporting J.K. Rowling at this point just proves the bankability of transphobia. So, this wonderful organization
That's awesome.
that spun off from the Harry Potter fandom and community, and especially the convention going community, but also the international and online community, um, to create tangible opportunities for direct action activism, focusing often on issues of literature, but also focusing literacy, sorry, and access to books. Through in their own communities, focusing on local organizing, but harnessing that the networking power and enthusiasm and passion that we all bring to our fandom hobbies, to further those conversations into tangible community organizing. And one of the things they've created over the years, that I think can be invaluable in that is a set of toolkits that are a workbook, but about a show you like. So
Oh, cool.
they'll have a Black Panther toolkit, and it will have conversation pieces, questions, materials to encourage conversation between you and your community and your friends about. It has starting points and basic accessible context and literature and education for you to start digging further in blank piece of media around the subjects that uh, are most apparent and most at the heart of that media piece. I pulling up a few examples. I know their Avatar: The Last Airbender toolkit um, deals explores a great deal of imperialism and post colonialism, uh, using using the language of Avatar and the language of Korra. So these there's a Night Vale one, a Steven Universe kit. There's Wizards Democracy kit. There's a Wonder Woman voting toolkit. Um, education libraries. Basically, these are packages to get you launched on some of these important conversations and to help you start digging further. And they're all ages family friendly, which also means they provide accessible language and accessible basic on ramps to the essential concepts, regardless what level you're starting at. So that's something that I would certainly recommend checking out if you want to scratch the surface of this more. I believe you can download most of them for free on their website or social media. And yeah, I'm done talking about things I like. I'm done talking
That's
about specific niche indie things I like in our in our big podcast, all about talking about things we like.
I love it. You talked for 20 minutes about things that I love getting just like really random recommendations. And then circling back around, I mean, I know the Harry Potter Alliance. I didn't know that they'd rebranded, so that's really cool. So thank you
Very
for
recent,
sharing that, Ryan.
yes.
I appreciate you coming to the podcast to share all of your wisdom and insight and being able to bounce stuff off of as we go. So
It's also neat.
hopefully people
Thank you for letting me
people have
info
learned
dump
something.
on y'all.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's it. I think that we've talked your ear off all night.
I'm out of water.
And I know. There you go. We need to hydrate. As everybody should. So yeah, that's it. I'll talk to you later. As I had mentioned, if you want to follow Ryan, you can listen to him on Riverdale
Riverdale
Gang
gang.
podcast, and follow him on Twitter for all that grand stuff. Thank you for coming to the Thundercrack podcast this
It's a
week.
pleasure.
And
It's
everybody, I just the Thunderquack group right now on the Patreon group, I guess, there is just Fast and Furious memes aplenty. And I think that we have teased people. I think when Mike is back, Mike had a grand old time at Fast 9. And so it is still on our docket to chat about. And in the meantime, you can enjoy amazing. It's like the Dom like for family. And it's just permeating all of the MCU. And like, I think it started with like the crossover for like Jurassic Park. And anyways, it's
funny.
glorious. So it's reminding me that we should talk about it.
I have read the argument, and I think I broadly agree with that. Fast and the Furious has in fact done more to create market viability and options for diversity and representation in blockbuster film than any one of these Disney pieces that were coming after the mark.
Nice.
Not my fandom, but just as or significantly more important in furthering the conversation.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I love it.
So
Great.
thanks for having me, and bye for now, folks.
Yeah. Stay safe, everybody. Wash your hands and be kind to one another.
Follow the Thunderquack Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook by searching the Thunderquack Podcast. You can support us in 3 ways. First, by heading to the podcast service of your choice and leaving a rating and review. Second, by going to store.thunderquack.com to pick up some merch from your favorite podcasts. And last but not least, by heading to patreon.com/thunderquack to kick in with your monthly pledge of support and get cool rewards like early access and extended episodes. The Thunderquack Podcast is the official podcast of thunderquack.com. Head to thunderquack.com to discover more great podcasts.